The law office smelled like old leather and disappointment. I sat there in my black suit, the same one I'd worn to Dad's funeral 3 days earlier, still feeling like I was walking through fog. Mr. Patterson, Dad's lawyer for over 20 years, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. The manila folder in front of him looked thick, official, and somehow threatening. "Before we begin," he said, glancing between my brother Jake and me, "I want you both to know that your father thought long and hard about these decisions." Jake shifted in his chair next to me. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. Hell, we hadn't spoken much in the past 2 years, if I'm being honest. But sitting there, waiting to hear how Dad had divided up his life's work, I felt like we were kids again, waiting to see who got the bigger piece of cake. Mr. Patterson opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "To my son Jacob," he began, and my heart sank a little. Here it comes, I thought. Jake was the older one, the one who'd worked construction with Dad for years before things went sideways. "I leave my tools, my pickup truck, and my best wishes for a future built on honest work." I looked over at Jake. His jaw was tight, but he nodded slightly. The tools made sense. The truck was old, but reliable. It seemed fair enough. "To my son Michael," Mr. Patterson continued, and I straightened up. "I leave everything else. The house on Maple Street, the rental property on Fifth Avenue, the savings account, the investment portfolio, and all other assets not specifically mentioned above." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything else? I must have heard wrong, but the lawyer kept reading, listing account numbers, property deeds, insurance policies. The room felt like it was spinning. I turned to look at Jake, expecting him to explode, to demand an explanation, to do something. But he just sat there, staring straight ahead like he'd turned to stone. His hands were folded in his lap, knuckles white, but his face was completely blank. Is there a letter or something?" I managed to ask. "An explanation?" Mr. Patterson nodded and handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it in Dad's handwriting. He asked me to give this to you after the reading. I took it with shaking hands but didn't open it. Not yet. Not with Jake sitting right there, probably hating me more with every second that passed. The lawyer wrapped up the formalities, explaining probate procedures and timelines. Jake signed where he needed to sign, shook Mr. Patterson's hand, and walked out without saying a word to me. The silence he left behind was deafening. I drove home to my little apartment above the bookstore where I worked, the envelope burning a hole in my jacket pocket. Dad's house, my house now I guess, sat empty across town. I couldn't bring myself to go there yet. Everything felt wrong, like I was wearing someone else's life. That night, I finally opened the letter. Dad's handwriting was shaky. The cancer had gotten to his hands near the end, but his words were clear. He talked about watching both of us grow up, about the choices we'd made, about second chances and third chances, and the pain of watching someone you love destroy themselves over and over again. He wrote about the money Jake had stolen from his wallet when he was 17, about the DUI that cost Dad his insurance rates, about the night Jake came home high and punched a hole in the kitchen wall when Mom was still alive and too sick to handle the stress, about loan after loan that never got paid back, promises that never got kept, and the final straw last Christmas when Jake had shown up drunk and demanding money for his girlfriend's bail. "I'm not punishing him," Dad had written. "I'm protecting what I worked for. Maybe this will finally teach him that actions have consequences. You were always the steady one, Mike. You stayed close. You helped with your mother. You never asked for anything. This is my way of saying thank you." I read the letter 3 times before I could see straight again. All those years I thought Jake was just the screw-up and I was the boring one. I never knew about half the stuff Dad mentioned. He'd kept so much of Jake's mess to himself, probably trying to protect both of us from it. The next few days crawled by. I called in sick to work and wandered around my apartment like a ghost. I kept expecting Jake to call, to show up at my door, to demand an explanation, or at least acknowledge what had happened. But my phone stayed silent. I tried reaching out first. I sent him a text. "Hey, we should talk about all this. Call me." Nothing. Then another. "I know this is weird. Maybe we can figure something out." Still nothing. By the end of the week, I was getting worried. Not about the inheritance. That felt like a problem for future me, but about Jake himself. We might not have been close lately, but he was still my brother. I drove by his apartment complex twice, but his car wasn't there. I asked around at Murphy's bar where he sometimes went, but nobody had seen him. His boss at the roofing company said he'd called in sick all week. It was like he'd just vanished. The silence started to feel different after that. Not just absent, but active. Like he was choosing not to respond, planning something. I caught myself looking over my shoulder when I walked to my car, checking my locks twice before bed. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I knew Jake better than anyone. He didn't handle disappointment well, and he'd never let anything go without a fight. I was right to be worried, but I had no idea how bad things were about to get. 3 weeks after the will reading, I was starting to accept that Jake might never speak to me again. I'd been sleeping better, finally able to focus at work again. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the bookstore, had been patient with my distracted state, but I could tell she was relieved when I started actually helping customers, instead of just staring out the window. I was reorganizing the mystery section when my phone buzzed. An email notification. The sender's name made my stomach drop. Jake Morrison. The subject line read, "Celebration for you. Let's reconnect." I nearly dropped my phone. After weeks of silence, this was the last thing I expected. I sat down on the little stool we kept behind the counter and opened the message. "Hey, Mike," it began, and already something felt off. Jake never called me Mike. It was always Mikey, or nothing at all. I know things have been weird since Dad's funeral, and I owe you an apology for how I've been acting. The inheritance thing caught me off guard, but I've had time to think about it, and I realized Dad knew what he was doing. You were always the responsible one. I read it twice, looking for the catch. This didn't sound like Jake at all. Too polite, too measured. Jake was a lot of things, but diplomatic wasn't one of them. "I'd like to invite you over for dinner this Saturday," the email continued. "Nothing fancy, just a chance to celebrate your good fortune and maybe talk about the future. I know some people who might be interested in the rental property if you're thinking about selling. Anyway, hope you can make it. 7 p.m., let me know. Jake." I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine. Maybe he really had taken time to process everything. Maybe he was ready to be brothers again. But another part of me, the part that remembered all those childhood fights that started with Jake being suspiciously nice, was screaming warnings. I called my friend Sarah, who'd known both of us since high school. "What do you think?" I asked after reading her the email. "Honestly, it sounds like he's up to something," she said without hesitation. "When has Jake ever invited you to dinner? When has he ever used the word fortune in a sentence? Mike, this is the same guy who tried to sell your Pokemon cards without asking when you were 12. She was right, of course. But what was the alternative? Spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd given him a chance? At least if I went, I'd know where I stood. I sent back a short reply. "Sure, I'll be there. Thanks for reaching out." Saturday couldn't come fast enough, and then suddenly it was here too soon. I spent all afternoon debating what to wear, what to bring, whether I should even go at all. Finally, I settled on jeans and a button-down shirt, casual but respectful, and picked up a bottle of wine from the corner store. Nothing expensive, just something to show I was making an effort. Jake lived in a duplex on the east side of town, the kind of neighborhood where half the houses needed new roofs, and the other half needed new everything else. His place was actually one of the better ones, with a small front yard that he sometimes remembered to mow. When I pulled up, I noticed there were 3 other cars parked outside. That was weird. He'd said dinner, not a party. Maybe he'd invited some mutual friends. But as I got closer to the house, I realized I didn't recognize any of the vehicles. One was a sleek black sedan that definitely didn't belong to anyone in our crowd. I sat in my car for a minute, engine running, trying to decide if I should leave. The whole thing felt wrong now. Jake's email had made it sound like just the 2 of us, but clearly, he had other plans. Before I could talk myself out of it, the front door opened. Jake stepped out onto the porch, and I barely recognized him. He was wearing a suit, an actual suit, dark blue with a tie and everything. In all the years I'd known him, I'd seen Jake in a suit exactly twice, at our parents' wedding anniversary party 10 years ago, and at Dad's funeral. He raised his hand in a wave that looked more like a summons than a greeting. There was no backing out now. I grabbed the wine and walked up the cracked concrete path to his front door. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "You look formal. Thanks for coming," he replied, but his voice was flat, like he was reciting lines. "Come on in." The living room was nothing like I remembered. Jake had always been messy, the kind of guy who left pizza boxes on the coffee table for weeks. But tonight, everything was clean, organized, almost sterile. The TV was off, which was practically unprecedented. Instead of his usual collection of beer bottles and video game controllers, there was a large wooden table set up in the middle of the room. 3 men in suits sat around the table, all of them older than us, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They had briefcases and manila folders spread out in front of them, and when I walked in, they all looked up at me with the kind of professional politeness that made my skin crawl. "Mike," Jake said, gesturing toward the table, "I'd like you to meet some friends of mine." Friends. Right. These guys looked about as friendly as tax auditors. The tallest one, a man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood up first. "Mr. Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David Walsh, attorney at law." Attorney at law. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. The other 2 introduced themselves as well. More lawyers, more professional handshakes, more fake smiles that never reached their eyes. I shook their hands mechanically, but my mind was racing. This wasn't a dinner. This wasn't a celebration. This was something else entirely. "Please, have a seat," Jake said, pointing to the only empty chair at the table. It was positioned directly across from him, with the 3 lawyers flanking him like some kind of tribunal. I looked at the wine bottle in my hand, suddenly feeling ridiculous. "Jake, what's going on here? You said this was dinner." "It is dinner," he said. But there was no food in sight, no smell of cooking, nothing that suggested a meal was even planned. "Sit down, Mike. We need to talk." The way he said my name sent chills down my spine. There was something cold in it, something that reminded me of Dad's voice when he was truly angry. But this was worse, because at least Dad's anger came from disappointment. This felt like pure calculation. I stayed standing, gripping the wine bottle like it might somehow protect me. "Talk about what?" "About making things right," Jake said. And finally, his mask slipped just a little. I saw a flash of the real Jake underneath all that fake politeness. The Jake who'd never forgotten a slight, who'd held grudges for years over things that didn't matter to anyone else. About giving me what Dad should have left me in the first place. The air in Jake's living room felt thick and hostile, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. I looked around at the 3 lawyers, then back at my brother, trying to process what was happening. This was an ambush, plain and simple, and I'd walked right into it. "Sit down, Mike," Jake said again, his voice completely different now. Gone was any pretense of the friendly reunion. This was the Jake I remembered from our worst fights as kids, the one who never backed down, never admitted he was wrong. "I think I'll stand," I said, though my legs felt shaky. The wine bottle in my hand suddenly seemed like a pathetic peace offering. "What's this really about, Jake?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked over to a side table I hadn't noticed before and picked up a thick stack of papers. The sound they made when he slammed them down on the main table was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "These," he said, pointing at the documents with an accusatory finger, "are going to fix Dad's mistake." One of the lawyers, Walsh, the tall one with glasses, slid the papers across the table toward me. I didn't need to read them to know what they were. Property transfer agreements, bank account changes, legal waivers. My name was already typed in at the bottom of several pages, just waiting for my signature. "You want me to sign over the inheritance," I said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to do the right thing," Jake shot back. Dad was sick when he made that will. He wasn't thinking straight. "You know as well as I do that I should have gotten half of everything, at minimum." I looked down at the papers, then back up at him. "And if I don't sign," the second lawyer, a shorter man with a beard who'd introduced himself as Peterson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Morrison," he said, addressing me, "we believe there are grounds to contest the will based on your father's diminished mental capacity in his final months. The cancer treatment, the medications, they can significantly impact judgment and decision-making." "That's a lie," I said, anger finally cutting through my shock. Dad was sharp right up until the end. You know that, Jake. Do I? Jake's voice was getting louder now, more like the brother I knew. Or maybe you were manipulating him. Maybe you were the one feeding him stories about me, turning him against his own son. You always were good at playing the victim. The accusation hit me like a slap. I never said a word against you to Dad. Not once. Right. And I'm supposed to believe that you just happened to be the perfect son while I was supposedly screwing up left and right? Come on, Mike. Even you're not that naive. The third lawyer, an older woman named Foster, opened her briefcase and pulled out more documents. We also have evidence suggesting that you may have had undue influence over your father's financial decisions in his final year. The fact that you were handling some of his bills, that you had access to his accounts. Because he asked me to help, I exploded. He was getting confused about due dates, missing payments. I was trying to make sure his electricity didn't get shut off. Exactly, Jake said, and there was something ugly in his smile. You had access. You had opportunity. And now you have motive. You're the sole beneficiary of his estate. It looks pretty suspicious from where I'm sitting. I stared at him, trying to find any trace of the brother I'd grown up with. The Jake who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd scared off the bullies who picked on me in middle school, who'd cried with me at Mom's funeral. But all I saw was a stranger wearing Jake's face. A stranger who was willing to destroy me to get what he wanted. You don't actually believe that, I said quietly. You can't. What I believe, Jake said, leaning forward across the table, is that you're going to sign those papers and transfer everything back to me where it belongs. Because if you don't, I'm going to take you to court. And I'm going to drag Dad's memory through the mud. And I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you really are. The threat hung in the air between us. Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I got the impression that maybe this wasn't going exactly the way he'd expected when Jake hired him. And what kind of person is that? I asked. The kind who takes advantage of a dying old man, Jake said without hesitation. The kind who steals from his own family. The kind who pretends to be Mr. Perfect while sabotaging everyone around him. Each word was like a knife, carefully chosen to cut as deep as possible. But underneath the anger, I could hear something else in Jake's voice. Pain, maybe. Or desperation. This wasn't just about money. This was about every slight, real or imagined, that had built up between us over the years. I never sabotaged you, I said. If anything, I covered for you. Do you have any idea how many times Dad asked me where you were when you disappeared for days? How many excuses I made for you when you missed family dinners, birthday parties, holidays? Oh, poor Mike, Jake said mockingly. Always the martyr. Always covering for his screwed up big brother. Well, guess what? I never asked you to do that. I never asked you to be my keeper. No, but I did it anyway. Because that's what families do. Families, Jake repeated, and he laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right. Like how Dad treated us equally. Like how he always made sure we both got the same opportunities. Come on, Mike. We both know you were always his favorite. I felt something break inside my chest. Not anger this time, but something deeper. Sadness, maybe. Or grief for the relationship we'd never really had. If that's what you really think, I said, then you don't know Dad at all. And you don't know me either. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the letter Dad had left for me. It was folded and refolded from all the times I'd read it, the edges soft from handling. I set it on the table next to the legal documents. Before we do anything else, I said, I think you should read this. Jake looked at the letter suspiciously, but Walsh leaned forward, clearly curious. What is it? A letter from our father, I said, explaining his decision. Jake deserves to know the truth, even if he's not going to like it. Jake picked up the letter slowly, like it might bite him. As he unfolded it and began to read, I watched his face change. First confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been shame. But it was fleeting, gone almost as soon as I saw it. He read the whole thing twice, his hands trembling slightly by the end. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears and fury. This doesn't change anything, he said, but his voice was weaker now, less certain. Dad was wrong about me. About all of it. Was he? I asked gently. Really? For just a moment, I thought I might have reached him. There was something vulnerable in his expression, something that looked like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But then his face hardened again, and he crumpled up the letter and threw it across the room. "Sign the papers, Mike," he said. "I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you." The crumpled letter lay on the floor near Jake's couch like a piece of trash, and something inside me snapped. Not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I looked at my brother sitting there with his hired guns, demanding I sign away everything Dad had worked for, and I realized I was done being afraid. "You know what, Jake?" I said, standing up straighter. "You're right about one thing. This doesn't change anything." He looked surprised, maybe even relieved. Walsh leaned forward, probably thinking he was about to get his signature and his fee. "But not in the way you think," I continued. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying around for days. "See? I've been doing some thinking too." Jake's eyes narrowed as I placed the envelope on the table next to his legal documents. "What's that?" "Insurance," I said. "Or maybe just covering my bases. You're not the only one who can hire lawyers, big brother." The truth was, I'd suspected something like this might happen. Not exactly this. I never imagined Jake would go quite this far. But I'd known he wasn't going to just accept Dad's decision quietly. So 3 days after the will reading, I'd gone to see my own lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Chen, who'd helped me with some paperwork when I bought my car. "Mike," Jake said, and there was a warning in his voice. "What did you do?" I opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Bank statements, police reports, medical records, witness statements, 3 weeks of careful documentation, all leading to this moment. "I did what Dad should have done years ago," I said. "I kept records." Walsh reached for the papers, but I pulled them back. "These are copies," I told him. "The originals are with my lawyer, along with a complete timeline of every incident Dad mentioned in his letter." Jake had gone very still, like a deer sensing a predator. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" I flipped through the pages until I found what I was looking for. "Here's the police report from when you crashed Dad's truck into the Miller's fence back in 2019. You were drunk, and Dad paid for the damages to keep you out of jail. $2,000. Peterson, the bearded lawyer, was looking increasingly uncomfortable. He kept glancing at the door like he was thinking about leaving. "Here's the statement from First National Bank about the check you forged on Dad's account last summer. $450. Dad didn't press charges because you're his son, but the bank kept records." Jake's face was getting red, but he wasn't interrupting anymore, maybe because he knew where this was going. "And here," I said, pulling out a hospital report, "is the documentation from when Dad had to get 6 stitches in his hand after you threw a bottle at him during your Christmas Eve visit. The one where you called him a worthless old man and said you wished he'd die already so you could get what was coming to you." The room had gone completely silent. Even Foster, who'd been taking notes throughout the evening, had stopped writing. The emergency room staff noted the injury was consistent with defensive wounds. I continued. "Dad told them he cut himself on a broken ornament, but the nurse wasn't buying it. She filed a report with social services." I set the papers down and looked directly at Jake. "Want to know the best part? I didn't have to dig any of this up. Dad kept everything. Every receipt, every report, every witness statement. He had a whole file cabinet full of documentation about your mistakes, as he called them." Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's not what?" I asked. "Not true? We both know it is. The only question is whether you want me to keep going, because I've got about 40 more pages here." Walsh cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Morrison, I think perhaps we should discuss this privately with our client." "No," Jake said sharply. "No. I want to hear this. I want to hear what kind of brother keeps files on his own family. The kind who watched his father get hurt over and over again and couldn't do anything about it," I said. "The kind who promised a dying man he'd protect what was left of his legacy." I picked up another document from the stack. This one's my favorite. It's a statement from your ex-girlfriend Lisa, the one you dated 2 years ago. She was willing to testify that you bragged about planning to contest Dad's will months before he died. that you said you'd find a way to get every penny the old bastard owed you. The color drained from Jake's face. Lisa's a liar. Maybe, but she's got text messages to back up her story. And so do 3 other people who heard you say similar things at Murphy's bar, at the auto parts store, at the gas station on Elm Street. Turns out, when you spend 2 years telling everyone in town that you're going to get revenge on your father, people remember. Peterson was already packing up his briefcase. "Mr. Morrison," he said to Jake, "I think we need to reconsider our legal strategy here." "What legal strategy?" I asked. "You mean the one where you claim Dad was mentally incompetent while I was manipulating him? Because I've got medical records showing that Dad passed every cognitive test his doctors gave him, right up until the week before he died. And I've got testimony from his nurses, his neighbors, and his doctors that he was sharp, alert, and making rational decisions." Foster stood up abruptly. "This consultation is over," she announced. "Mr. Morrison, my firm will be withdrawing from this matter effective immediately." "You can't just leave," Jake protested, but she was already heading for the door. "We can and we are," Walsh said, following her lead. "This case is unwinnable, and frankly, it borders on fraudulent. I'd recommend you find yourself a different kind of lawyer, maybe a criminal defense attorney." Peterson was the last to leave, and he paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "your father's will is airtight. Any judge in the state would uphold it based on what I've seen tonight." And then they were gone, leaving Jake and me alone in his living room with the echoes of their footsteps and the weight of 20 years of bad choices hanging between us. Jake slumped back in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "You planned this," he said. "All of it?" "No," I said, sitting down across from him for the first time that night. "I hoped I wouldn't need any of it. I hoped you'd come to me like a brother, and we'd figure out something that worked for both of us. But you were ready." "I was ready," I admitted. "Because I know you, Jake. I've always known you. And I knew that if you felt cornered, you'd come out swinging." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the crumpled letter on the floor. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "So what happens now?" he asked. "You call the cops? Press charges? Destroy me completely?" I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't expected. Not just defeat, but relief, like he was tired of carrying all that anger and resentment around. "Now," I said, reaching into my jacket one more time, "I show you what I was planning to give you before you decided to threaten me." I pulled out a blue folder from my jacket, one I'd been carrying around for over a week, waiting for the right moment to share it. Jake watched me warily as I set it on the table between us, right next to the scattered remains of his legal ambush. "What's that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Something I had my lawyer draw up the day after the will reading," I said. "Before the threats, before tonight, before any of this mess." Jake stared at the folder like it might explode. "I don't understand." "Open it." He reached for it hesitantly, his hands still shaking a little from the adrenaline of watching his lawyers flee. Inside were several official-looking documents, all bearing the letterhead of Chen & Associates Legal Services. The first page was a property transfer agreement for the rental house on Fifth Avenue. The second was a bank authorization splitting Dad's savings account. The third was a signed agreement giving Jake half the proceeds from any future sale of the family home. "What is this?" Jake whispered, flipping through the pages. $50,000 from the savings account, I said. "The rental property that brings in $800 a month. And half of whatever we get when we sell Dad's house. It's not everything, but it's enough to get you back on your feet if you want to." Jake looked up at me, confusion written all over his face. "I don't get it. Why would you—" "Because you're my brother," I said simply. "Because Dad loved you, even when you made it impossible for him to show it. And because I never wanted any of this to come between us." He set the papers down carefully, like they were made of glass. "But after everything I just did, the lawyers, the threats—" "Yeah, well, you always were dramatic." I tried to smile, but it felt shaky. "Remember when you convinced Mom that I'd broken her favorite vase? And then 3 days later you felt so guilty you confessed and bought her a new one with your birthday money. I was 8. You were still an idiot, but you were my idiot." Jake picked up Dad's crumpled letter from the floor and smoothed it out on his knee. He really wrote all that about me. He did. But he also kept every birthday card you ever made him, including the one from 3rd grade where you spelled his name wrong. He had pictures of your high school graduation on his dresser right next to mine. He never stopped loving you, Jake. He just didn't know how to help you anymore. I screwed up, Jake said quietly. I screwed up so bad, Mike. All those things in your files, they're all true. And there's stuff you don't even know about. Like what? He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Remember when Dad's watch went missing? His father's watch, the one from the war? I felt my stomach sink. Jake, no. Tell me you didn't. I pawned it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was behind on rent, and I was scared I'd get evicted, and I thought I could get it back before he noticed. But then the pawn shop sold it, and I didn't have the money to track it down. That's why he stopped wearing watches. I think so. He never said anything, never accused me, but he stopped wearing them after that. And every time I saw his bare wrist, I felt like the worst person in the world. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Anything else I should know about? The tool shed fire wasn't an accident. I was smoking weed out there and fell asleep. Burned up half his equipment. He looked up at me with eyes full of shame. The car accident when I was 19? I wasn't just drunk, I was high too. But Dad told the cops I'd just been at a party drinking beer. Could have lost his insurance completely if they'd known. Each confession hit like a physical blow. I'd known Jake had problems, but I'd never realized how deep they went, how much Dad had covered up over the years. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you're giving me money, Jake said. And I don't deserve it. Because every time someone in this family tried to help me, I found a way to make it worse. Because maybe if I'm honest about what I did, I can figure out how to stop doing it. I looked at my brother sitting there in his ridiculous suit, finally telling the truth about things he'd been hiding for years, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take time. But understanding. You want to know something? I said. I was jealous of you for years. Jake looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Jealous? Of what? Of how easy everything seemed for you. You were bigger, stronger, more confident. You could walk into any bar in town and have 5 friends in 10 minutes. Women loved you. Even when you screwed up, people still wanted to be around you. Are you insane? You were the one everyone liked. You were the smart one, the responsible one. I was the boring one, I corrected. The one who never took risks, never caused problems, never did anything interesting enough to get in trouble for. Do you know how exhausting it is to be the good son all the time? Do you know how exhausting it is to be the disappointment? We sat there looking at each other across that table, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually seeing my brother, instead of just the problems he caused. So what do we do now? Jake asked eventually. I gestured toward the blue folder. That's up to you. The money's yours if you want it. No strings attached, no conditions. But Jake, yeah? If you take it and blow it on drugs or gambling or whatever, that's it. I'm done. I won't have anything left to give you, and I won't put myself through watching you self-destruct again. Jake nodded slowly. That's fair. And if you take it and use it to get your life together, really together, not just pretend together, then maybe we can figure out how to be brothers again. You'd want that? After tonight? I thought about it honestly. I don't know. Ask me in a year. But Jake, I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being angry at you. And I'm tired of you being angry at me. Life's too short. And we're the only family either of us has left. Jake picked up one of the legal documents and stared at it for a long time. Why didn't you just give this to me at the lawyer's office? Why wait until now? I stood up and grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. Because I needed to know who you really were first. The brother I grew up with, or the stranger who hired lawyers to threaten me. And now you know? I looked at him one more time. Really looked at him. The suit was wrinkled now, his tie crooked, his hair messed up from running his hands through it. He looked like Jake again, not like some corporate shark. Yeah, I said. Now I know. I walked toward the door, leaving the blue folder on the table. The documents are already signed and notarized. If you want them, they're yours. If you don't, just throw them away. Mike, Jake called as I reached for the doorknob. I'm sorry, for all of it. For tonight, for Dad, for everything. I paused with my hand on the door. I know you are. The question is what you're going to do about it. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the whole scene in my head, wondering if I'd done the right thing, wondering if Jake would actually take the money, or if he'd throw it back in my face out of pride. Part of me almost hoped he would refuse it. It would make things simpler, cleaner, if I could just write him off completely. But life's never that simple, especially when family's involved. The first sign that things might actually change came at 7 a.m. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. This is David Walsh. I wanted you to know that my firm has officially withdrawn from your brother's case. I also wanted to apologize for last night. What we attempted was ethically questionable at best, and I should have known better. I was still staring at that message when another one came in, this one from Peterson. My client misrepresented the facts of his case to our firm. We have withdrawn our services and will not be pursuing any action against you or your father's estate. Foster's message was shorter. Case withdrawn. Good luck to both of you. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the sun come up over the downtown buildings. 3 lawyers, all backing away from Jake's revenge plan in less than 12 hours. Maybe there was still some justice in the world after all. Around 9, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mike, it's Jake. His voice sounded different. Tired, maybe, but calmer than it had been in months. Hey, I said carefully. How are you doing? I've been better. Listen, I wanted to call and tell you. I'm taking the deal, the money, the property, all of it, but I'm doing it right this time. What does that mean? It means I'm checking myself into rehab. There's a place up in Springfield that has a program for people with gambling problems, too. 60 days, no contact with the outside world, the whole thing. I nearly dropped the phone. Seriously? Seriously. I called them this morning, and they have an opening next week. I figure if I'm going to take your money, the least I can do is get clean first. Jake, I didn't know what to say. That's really good. I'm proud of you. Don't be proud yet, he said with a sound that might have been a laugh. Ask me again in 60 days. But Mike, I wanted you to know that I'm going to pay you back. Every penny. It might take a while, but I'm going to do it. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. Not because you're making me, but because I need to. For me. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about practical things, where he'd left his car keys, whether I could water his plants while he was gone. Stupid, everyday stuff that felt normal and comforting after the drama of the night before. After I hung up, I drove over to Dad's house for the first time since the funeral. I'd been avoiding it, treating it like it was haunted or cursed. But suddenly I needed to be there. The key was still hidden under the fake rock by the front steps, just like always. Inside, everything was exactly as Dad had left it. His coffee mug in the sink, his reading glasses on the kitchen counter, his favorite chair still positioned perfectly to see both the TV and the bird feeder outside the window. I sat in that chair and looked around at the life he'd built. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just comfortable and clean and loved. On his bookshelf, I found the photo albums Mom had put together years ago. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Jake and me as kids, missing teeth and grass-stained knees, arms thrown around each other like we were best friends instead of just brothers. There was one picture that stopped me cold. Jake must have been about 15, and he was teaching me to drive in the empty parking lot behind the grocery store. Dad had taken the picture through the passenger window, and you could see both of us laughing at something. Jake's hand was on my shoulder, and I was grinning like he'd just told me the funniest joke in the world. I remembered that day. Jake had been grounded for something, probably staying out too late, but he'd snuck out anyway to give me my first driving lesson because I'd been begging him for weeks. We'd spent 2 hours in that parking lot, and he'd been patient and encouraging, even when I stalled the engine 5 times in a row. That was the Jake I wanted to remember. The big brother who'd protected me from bullies, who'd shared his Halloween candy when I lost mine, who'd let me tag along with his friends even when it wasn't cool to have your little brother around. Maybe that Jake was still in there somewhere. Maybe rehab would help him find his way back. 2 days later, I got a call that surprised me. It was from Marcus Webb, the director of the Springfield Treatment Center. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "I wanted to personally thank you for helping your brother get into our program. It's clear that having family support means a great deal to him." "He's really there?" I asked. "He actually went through with it. He checked in yesterday morning." I have to tell you, in 20 years of doing this job, I've rarely seen someone as motivated to change as your brother appears to be. He's already participating in group sessions, he's working with a counselor, and he's expressed interest in our job training program. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. "There's something else," Dr. Webb continued. "Your brother asked me to tell you that he won't be contacting you during treatment. He says he needs to focus on getting better without any distractions. But he wanted you to know that what you did for him, giving him a second chance, it means everything." After I hung up, I sat in Dad's chair and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like maybe things were going to be okay. I spent the rest of that week going through Dad's things, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. In his desk drawer, I found something that made me smile. A folder labeled Jake's Good Days. Inside were report cards from elementary school, a certificate from a church basketball league, a thank you note Jake had written after Dad helped him move into his first apartment. Dad had kept everything. Even when Jake was at his worst, even when it seemed like there was nothing good left to remember, Dad had kept a record of the times when his older son had made him proud. I added the photo of us learning to drive to that folder, and then I put it in the box of things I was keeping. Someday, when Jake was ready, I'd give it to him. Maybe he needed to remember those good days too. 6 weeks later, I got another call from the treatment center. This time it was Jake himself. "I graduate next week," he said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "They offered me a job in their maintenance department, and I think I'm going to take it. It's not much money, but it's honest work, and they have good benefits." "That's amazing, Jake. I'm really happy for you. I've been thinking about a lot of things while I've been here," he said. "About Dad, about you, about the mess I made of everything. I can't change the past, but I can do better going forward. That's all any of us can do. Mike, when I get out, would it be okay if I came by sometime? I'd like to see Dad's house one more time, maybe help you figure out what to do with it." I looked around the living room where I was sitting, at the boxes of memories and the empty spaces where furniture used to be. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." And for the first time in years, I meant it. My brother was coming home. Not the angry, desperate man who'd tried to steal my inheritance, but the person he used to be, the person he could still become. Dad would have been proud. Hell, he probably was proud, wherever he was. His boys were finally learning how to be brothers again. And maybe that was the real inheritance he'd left us. Not money or property, but the chance to find our way back to each other. It had taken a crisis, some harsh truths, and a lot of pain, but we'd gotten there in the end. Sometimes that's how families work. You have to break apart completely before you can figure out how to fit back together. But we were fitting back together, one conversation at a time, and that felt like the most valuable thing I'd ever inherited.